Tonight, new evidence has surfaced that could unlock the secrets of Lake Champlain. Is a marine reptile lurking beneath the depths of this 124-mile-long lake? This researcher believes there is, and she has substantial evidence to back the claim utilizing the biological method of echolocation. In 1962, 4 men are presumed dead after a scuba diving trip to the USS Massachusetts turns tragic. The lone survivor was found off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. He tells a horrific tale of how his fellow comrades were attacked by a serpent-like monster. Lake Champlain is a massive lake in northern Vermont. Its greatest depth is 400 feet, 122 meters. The shores of Lake Champlain reach as far as Charlotte, Vermont, and Essex, New York. For decades now, eyewitnesses have claimed they've seen strange creatures residing in these waters. They dubbed the name Champ or Champy, America's Loch Ness. Lake monsters and sea serpents have been seen dating back to the 14th century. Even during the days of the Great Global Flood and the days of Noah, the waters receded, forever trapping these creatures in their own ecosystems. So it's not unheard of to think that something may be still roaming the watery depths below. Tonight, you will hear from 2 individuals who share a commonality. Both avid researchers, one with new evidence to share and the other with a story passed down to him, father to son. Join us for this special edition of the Ropen Network.
There's a good chance we're dealing with an organic creature or we're dealing with a supernatural entity.
Pterosaurs, according to evolution, have been extinct for 70 million years or so.
Our objective to research information that describes the truth about the entire cosmos.
And the name of the business is SJ Polygraph, which is directly behind me, where the examination will be taking place.
There's very good evidence that is indicating that they still are alive.
Katy, good evening and welcome back to the Ropen Network. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me back on. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Yes, it has. But tell me again, for the audience's sake, who may be tuning in for the first time, how long have you been researching Lake Champlain?
Doing field research, it will be my 13th year in 2025. So it's been quite a journey and a roller coaster, to say the least. How do I explain it? A lot of time and a lot of dedication to no matter what anybody says. And I always tell people, I really don't care what anybody thinks, if there's something in the lake or not. It's about the protection aspect of the creatures. And it's also about the protection aspect of Lake Champlain, because there's millions of gallons of sewage getting into Lake Champlain every year, and legislature does absolutely nothing about it. And this needs to change. And I'm hoping with this new evidence that we'll be talking about shortly, that it will be an awakening for a legislature to do something, because something definitely needs to be done. I mean, not to mention it's drinking water for thousands and thousands of people in Vermont. I don't understand. It's all about the money. Politics are that way. As you know, I know that you're involved in politics. So there's a lot of shady things going on. And unfortunately, the environmental aspects in the world, to me, are not addressed enough. You rarely see a politician that's all about the environmental aspects. I mean, maybe here and there, excuse me, they'll talk about like, oh, I'll help out with climate change and all these other things, but yet they can't fix anything else in a lower position as they are now. And they haven't done that. I mean, that's happened in Vermont. So,
well, this will be your chance
very,
to show them
sad.
more, to say, hey, look, we have a serious problem here that needs to be addressed. And I think that's when it comes to legislation, I tell everybody who's constituents, you shouldn't write a letter. You need to go see these people in person, because they get so many emails per day, and it's
Yes.
overwhelming. They get thousands of emails, depending on the district. But I always say, go in person, meet them in person, make them hear you, because that's what they're there for. That's their job. Good. I'm glad to see that something could be moving forward to protect this environment and these creatures, because we know, I personally believe they are out there. And Champ researchers have come and gone, but your work has stayed constant.
I wrote a law in 2018 that was passed by New York legislature, and that was a huge goal of mine to do that. And I never really thought that it would happen because I figured that these people would say, "This lady's insane," even though they've heard tons of stories from relatives, and even some of them have had their own sightings. One of the men on the town board in Mariah, I talked to him. What was it? In August. And I'd never met him before. I'd seen him pass by and he'd wave, "Katy Elizabeth, how you doing?" He'd always wave, but I never really got to get into a conversation. And then he revealed to me that he had a sighting of two of them right in front of his property, which is like right next to the marina where I keep Kelpie too. So I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And he described the horse-like head, the blackish brownish skin, two of them, one diagonally behind the other, which seems to be a type of pattern that they have. Even at Loch Ness, there was a video that Gordon Holmes had gotten. And it's really interesting because you see one in the front over to the side and then one further back. Seems to be some sort of pattern that they have. I think it's basically cooperative feeding. So they're going after fish and they're corralling the fish to each other. There's just a certain pattern. It could be a pecking order type of thing. Maybe the male is in the front and the female is in the back. Who knows? But there's definitely something going on with that pattern. But it was interesting to me to actually talk to this guy that was on the town board that was one of the people that passed the law unanimously. And I'm like, well, damn, I know why he did, because he had his own sighting himself. So that was very helpful.
That's all
too.
it takes. That's what it takes.
Yes.
You mentioned that he said it stuck its head out of the water. Was it the neck as well?
Yeah,
So
he
neck
saw it was very, very low though. He said it was probably about a foot off of the water, so it wasn't like a high head and neck carriage, but definitely saw the head and neck out of the water.
Well, I think the reason I asked this question, I'm glad you mentioned it, is because a lot of people think it might be just an oarfish, but oarfish can't stick their necks out of the water. Okay, they don't really surface. Okay, I can understand why people are drawing the comparison to a Cadborosaurus and an oarfish, because they got that kind of distinctive horse-like face. But you know a fish when you see a fish versus something that should just not exist today. Very good.
There's a big difference. I did see the, excuse me, the animal that you're mentioning online the other day that people have been saying, oh, it looks so much like Cadborosaurus, that funny looking moose shaped head. And I'm like, yeah, it actually does, but it doesn't make any sense because they don't vertically undulate as well. And then the wrong color. I mean, they're this silver color and Champ is not described as silver. So there's another thing that leaves that one out.
Well, when it comes to Lake Champlain research, your name is at the top of the list. I feel that this is due to how much participation and emphasis you put on your research and that no one else can seem to replicate. Why is that? What sets you apart from the crowd, Katy?
Oh gosh, I think thinking outside the box and coming up with new ideas every year, going to the same locations that there have been a lot of sightings. When I got the sonar in 2019 and then in 2022, the one in 2022 is in a different spot than the one in 2019. I did get two sets of, actually, it's kind of funny because I came across the sonar images from 2019 and I didn't even post all of them because it's kind of hard to explain, but it's frame by frame with the two swimming underneath the boat. I actually have like 3 to 4 frames aside from that one that you see, but they're very, very broken up. So basically when the sonar beam's hitting the animals, this is why I think this is happening. If they're doing a even side to side motion as well as that vertical undulation, the beam's only hitting so much of their body. So you're seeing like sections. And then that one that I showed in 2019 where they're right underneath the boat and you can see the serpentine shapes, that part in that series of frames, it's hitting their whole more of their body that you can actually see. So I'll have to,
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing a video of the pieces of evidence that I have all into one video. And I'm going to be showing that. No one's ever seen that. So it's going to be really fun to show that. Cause when I put the sonar images out, I had to make it as simple as I could. Cause otherwise people don't understand. It's like, oh, she's got 5 pictures. Well, how come this one's broken up? And I didn't want to get into that. I wanted to be simple. Okay, this is what I got. This is the best frame that I got, but it wasn't the only one that I got. So it's really, really exciting to be able to share that with everybody once I get the video done. So that's a project that I'm working on.
Katy, let's dive into this evidence. Okay, this is exciting stuff here. You feel you have captured a new recording that could potentially prove the existence of these creatures. Was the discovery made on September 20th of this year?
Yes, it was. It was September 20th of this year. And the whole season up until then was a complete, I want to say, failure. I mean, honestly, I ran into so many issues. The boat, since it's not brand new, had a lot of problems because over the winter time there was like the ignition switch that had gotten really, really wet. You would think that parts on a boat would be waterproof, but a lot of them aren't, the mechanical parts, up where the dashboard is and stuff. And this guy that does drone footage in the area for businesses and whatnot, and he does a great job. So we were out doing some B-roll shots and stuff from that. And then after he was finished, I said, let's go up to near where I got the sonar images in 2019. They seem to like it up in that area. So on the way up, I didn't see anything on the sonar, but we stopped in a very central location because the boat was kind of giving me some issues with it. It wouldn't keep running. It kept just bogging out. I figured out later there was some water in the fuel and stuff like that. So we took care of that, but we got to the location and we sat, and I'm like, I want to sit at this particular spot because it's central to a lot of the sighting areas as well as the sonar area. And also where it was, everybody, if I went to call somebody and say, hey, we're broke down, can you come and tow us? We're at such and such a place. People know where it is because it's a good fishing spot.
Yeah.
So that was the plan. So I had my headphones on. It was about 85 degrees, quite warm for that time of year. It happened to be almost like an Indian summer. It was pretty hot. So I took off the headphones and I put them on the seat because like your ears get all sweaty and nasty and stuff, but it was still recording. And I heard this clicking and I'm like, what the hell is that clicking? And that's how loud it was. I could hear it from the headphones on the seat. So I'm all excited. I'm like, oh my God. So I threw the headphones on and sure enough, echolocation. But I said, I'm not going to jump to conclusions yet. I looked around me. There was no boats around. This was not consistent with a fish finder type of sonar, which is normally tick, 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 tick. It's like a ticking clock when you record a regular fish finder sonar, mechanical sound. And I was so excited, but I'm like, I'm always one of those that has to go home and listen to it and go over it 50 times for me to say something because I'm very thorough because you have to be picky. You can't just throw out any little thing and say, oh, this is echolocation. I mean, there was a guy that I knew that was kind of going out and doing a little bit of research. Since then, he's quit. People come and go all the time. They'll start it and then they're gone again because it's so expensive and it's very time consuming.
It is.
But he had gotten some recordings and he said it was echolocation, but it was the microphone hitting the side of the boat. And he got really mad at me when I told him that was my opinion. And he got really upset. But I'm like, I'm just telling you that's what it's. And then sure enough, he went and got a hold of the manufacturer of the hydrophone system. And he said the same thing. So I think that's why he quit. But you can't quit after one mistake that you made or not getting anything because you just never know when it's going to come up like it did on September 20th.
Right. You sound like me where we're excited about just one little thing that can make us to continue the drive for discovery.
Yes.
That's what it really takes. I understand his frustration, but this is a tough field. If you want to try to prove something, it takes years. It takes time. Sometimes it happens immediately. Some people get really lucky, and some people are just devoted to what they do, and they have a lot of patience. And I believe you have that patience because you know something will turn out or surface eventually if you just stick with it. So it was 80 degrees on that day. This is a place where these creatures have been seen many times, below the surface or above as well?
Above as well. There was a sighting not far away by people on a ship called the Curlew that had seen a massive serpent, and they said it was around 100 feet long, but I think it was two creatures. A lot of people have asked me, do you think,
That's right.
excuse me, do you think it was the same creatures that you got on your sonar? And I said, that isn't really that far-fetched, only because, as you know, Greenland sharks can live up to 400 years. We really don't know how long these animals can live.
Right.
So, I mean, it's possible.
Got a hunch they can live a long time.
Yes. Very much like turtles. Turtles can live a long time, alligators, crocodiles, and those are reptiles.
Yeah.
We just don't know how long they live. So it's pretty interesting. That area seems to be very, very popular with them. And I think the reason why is the concentration of fish.
The healthy skeptics. And I refer to them as healthy skeptics because that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. They were probably assuming that this was just, you picked up, the clicking noise may have been attributed to fish when we were trying to make a comparison here. But obviously that clicking noise is not coming from fish types. It's coming from something else, correct?
Yes. I had a marine biologist analyze the recordings, and she was amazed. She couldn't believe the complex nature of the sounds, because in between, I noticed this, and I said to her, her name is Cindy Jolie, and she's in Perth, Australia. And I said, Cindy, there's some buzzing in between, and am I wrong? And she said, I'm going to listen to everything and give you my analysis, So she listened to it. She goes, oh my God, I can't believe this. This is so complex. It's very similar to modern day toothed whales, but there's something very, very different and complex about it. Now, reptiles and amphibians do make clicking type of sounds underwater. The problem with that is bioacoustics with reptiles and amphibians is something quite new that's going on, where they're starting to learn their communication underwater. It's a new study.
Isn't that something? Amazing adaptation there, a way of communicating. And I love the fact that you took that to a marine biologist to get her opinion on it. And she says it's definitely unique, rare, words basically to describe it.
Yes, I mean, she was amazed by it. And I remember when I showed her the sonar images in 2019 and then also the video in 2022. And she was just like flabbergasted. She didn't know what to think. She's like, you got to be kidding me. This is crazy.
Seeing that you live in Florida, how often do you travel to Vermont just to do research?
This summer I went up, I believe it was 4 times because of the crazy weather and the boat complications. Normally I would probably be going up at least a couple times for about 2 weeks at a time. It's really helpful that I do know the hot spots to go, though, because otherwise, it would be really, really difficult. I hope they don't change their behavioral ways where they start going into different places that I don't normally go, because then I'm going to have to start all over again. But it seems like throughout the years and hundreds of years, these animals have been pretty much staying in the same areas, and I think it's because of that concentration of marine life where they're feeding.
I know we've talked about this before, but it's such a good one. It really is. And I just want the audience who may be new to hear this again, because it's pivotal. You've actually chatted with this nice lady who I think passed away. And I would have loved that opportunity. But I'm glad you had that chance, where she saw two of them cross underneath a light on her property. They may have been stealing some of her sheep or something like that. But she saw two different variations, or the same kind, just different colors. But when they crossed under the light, you could see them in all their glory. Do you remember that story? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, the woman that you're talking about, it was Christine Heber, and she had a sighting up in Burlington, Vermont, at the mouth of the Winooski River. That location, obviously the mouth of a river, you've got a lot of fish coming out, which is a great feeding place. She had told me, and it was kind of funny because I saw her on the Monster Quest episode, and at first I thought, this lady's absolutely nuts, because I didn't know her. And I met her, and I'll tell you what, you want to talk about spry and just full of life, and she told the way it was. She'd say, I don't give a crap what anybody thinks. I know what I saw. And I always tell her the same thing. I'm like, same with me. And she's like, we're so blessed to have had our experiences, aren't we? Like, it was just so much fun chatting with her. And at the time, she was living at the boathouse with, I don't know if her dad was there, but her mom was there in the other room. And she was sleeping. She was like 3:00 in the morning, and they had a bunch of beagle dogs that were barking because they used to rent out boats. And they did up until a few years ago when her brother Charlie passed away, who I was very good friends with as well. And they used to rent out these rowboats, and she figured maybe someone was there trying to steal one of the rowboats. So the dogs were freaking out, and she looked out, and there was a light pole that overlooked this ramp, this boat ramp. And she saw two things. She goes, they look just like a dinosaur, two of them, one bigger and one smaller. And she said the larger one it looked all moldy to me. She said it looked like it was covered in mold. And then the smaller one was a blackish brownish color. And she said that 2 weeks later, they came back. And she was always hesitant to tell people that she saw two. And especially twice, but it was around the same time. This is where I try to tell people these animals are habitual.
When I think about them walking on land, there are different variations that come to mind, and everybody brings up the Plesiosaur, Elasmosaurus, a Chronosaur, or maybe even a Tanystropheus. We've talked about this before. So I understand where people are going with the variants and what could be out there, what this lake has to offer. But also where people do bring up the idea of a large turtle. Okay. And that could be a possibility too, but I'm wondering where the shells are going. It's a lake. They should be floating somewhere, right? Maybe.
I totally agree. So, it's one of the better theories in my opinion, but the lack of the shell on the sonar images, that's number one for me. The lack of the shell, you're not finding shells floating around. You'd think you would have found one by now. The other problem with that too is vertical undulation. How the heck is an animal like that with a shell going to vertically undulate? Well, it could be part of their neck, I guess, or something like that. With the whole animal that's visible doing that vertical undulation, you can't do that with a shell. Unless they're a shellless type of turtle.
That's a good point.
You never know. With the evolutionary adaptation, I guess it's possible. So, but with the shell, I don't know. Someone had come up with that theory, and I know who it is. And I love the guy to pieces. He's very nice, but I don't know where in the world he came up with it. I guess people see things in different ways. Like you can see Jesus on a piece of toast.
Yeah, I wouldn't go there. But I think we have people who are not on the lake themselves. So they're coming up with ideas and theories. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But until you actually put it to use and get out there for yourself, it'll be just an assumption. It's just a theory. Okay. So yeah, I agree with you on this one. It's really difficult to accept the turtle idea. I'm not sure if I'm for it. It's a possible good theory, but I'm having a hard time buying it. I really am. Katy, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to have you.
It was great to chat with you.
It's been a pleasure hearing about your research. And this is exciting information with this new evidence that has surfaced that you helped bring into light. to help tell us more about these amazing creatures that are inhabiting Lake Champlain. Yes, they are out there. What kinds they are, we're not sure. There could be different variants of them. Definitely something that walks on land, though, which I strongly believe in. Flippers or feet, I don't care. To me, they are marine reptiles, and they have survived. Thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. It was great being on the show again.
The RRN Ropen Radio Network is brought to you by 511 Tactical. Always be ready. By Creation Evidence Museum of Texas. God's Word in 6 days. And by the Wildlife Safari, America's top cheetah breeding program. You are closer to Africa than you think.
On a warm Saturday morning in 1962, March 24th to be exact, 16-year-old Brian McCleary was sipping on a cup of coffee when the phone rang. It was his friend Eric Royal asking if he was up for one heck of an adventure. Brian inquired what type of adventure. What Eric told him absolutely stunned and wowed him. Eric knew of a place just 2 miles into the ocean from Fort Pickens State Park where they would explore something incredible. Back in January of 1921, the USS Massachusetts cruised to this exact location and her crew abandoned her. Just sitting there in the Gulf was this giant Indiana-class battleship. Soon after, the Navy opened fire and shelled the battleship until it mostly sank. It fell upon a sandbar and could go no deeper, leaving part of the battleship exposed out of the water. Brian, whose full name was Edward Brian McCleary, gathered his gear and waited for Eric to show up. Soon, an old beat-up Ford pulled up with Eric and 3 others. Warren Ray Sally, a 17-year-old who had moved to Florida from Danville, Illinois. He was the oldest of the group. Brian was the second oldest, followed by Eric, then Larry, Stuart Bill, a 15-year-old native from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and the youngest was Bradford J. Rice, a 14-year-old that everybody simply called Brad. Just on the outskirts of Pensacola, Florida, there on the beach was a 3-story tall Civil War fort with a tower on top of it. The boys climbed and explored the fort before walking their gear and raft down to the beach. The boys took turns paddling out to the battleship so no one would be worn out and they could all enjoy diving and exploring in the spooky ruins of the giant battleship. A wind began to blow in from the north, which should have aided the boys, but Larry pointed out that they had been rowing a great distance parallel to the ship instead. Stead about to it, Warren pedaled fiercely to correct the raft and literally wore his arms out to the point he was probably not going to enjoy much diving, as now his arms were extremely sore, and the boys had been paddling for a very long time and had not yet reached the ship. Warren called off the expedition as he was sure a storm was brewing, and so the boys decided to call it a day after their first attempt to explore the ship was a dud. They would have to return another day. With that, they turned the raft and headed home. Well, at least they tried. As they paddled fiercely toward the shore, they watched it shrink away and fade into the distance as they were being swept out to sea by the winds and waves. There were only 2 oars, and they needed more power. Ryan, Eric, and Warren jumped into the water, got behind the raft, and began to kick their feet to propel the raft to land. Meanwhile, Larry and Brad paddled. The boys began to cramp from the frigid water and had to climb back into the raft. Warren was now useless as his leg and arms were both shot. Just then, a small vessel came near to them. They were saved. They were so close, they could tell a lady on the bow was elderly. The boys excitedly waved their arms as they made clear eye contact with her. But the old lady just waved back, oblivious. Brad had brought a spear gun in case they needed it for bull sharks in the area. He had one of the boys take off his red shirt and they tied it around the tip of the spear. Brad aimed it at the boat and fired. They sailed a red flag of distress in the air to the boat. The old lady watched the incoming projectile with the red flag land near her boat. The boys watched her head tracing its flight pattern. she saw it, the boys cheered and felt relief. But the lady was still puzzled and did not notify anyone on her boat, and it continued onward toward Port Bryan. Larry, wailing in tears and breaking the silence with the words, quote, "We're lost. Damn those fools. We're lost. We'll drown," end quote. Brian, refusing to die or give up, began searching the water. In excitement, he pointed to a towering metal buoy just about a mile away in the exact direction the current was pulling them. Brian told them everything was okay. They could just tie onto the buoy and weather out the storm. The waves swamped the raft and filled it with icy water. Brian took the anchor in line, swinging it overhead like he was about to rope a calf, and hurled it to launch onto the buoy, but missed. The chance to reach the buoy was over, and, quote, "The raft was caught in the undertow and dragged right for the bottom of the buoy. It was going downhill in a roller coaster," end quote. Brian ordered everyone to jump, or they would absolutely die. With that, he and the boys plunged into the turbulent sea, and sure enough, the raft was sucked under. It was gone. Certain doom was postponed for a moment. They bought themselves a few more minutes of life. A loud voice of exciting hope overpowered the doom. It was pointed out that the raft had resurfaced. They swam out to the raft and overturned it. They all climbed back in, but the raft was dragged out to sea in the turbulent waves. They went right by the USS Massachusetts. The boys continued to flow out to sea for a stretch of time, till finally the slamming rains turned to a gentle mist. The waves completely rolled to the point of a calm lake. It was over. All 5 of them survived the storm. Although this ordeal was over, a thick fog rolled in, and they sat out in the ocean in this deafening silence, unable to see past 25 feet. Fear gripped them again. Not a ripple of water, not a splash, just deafening silence as they sat perfectly still in the thick fog. Yet again, another tide of good fortune, as Larry sprung up to a sitting position with wide eyes, as he told them all to hush that he heard a boat splashing in the water. The air filled with a sickening stench of rotting fish. Brian was just about to vomit from the putrid smell when a thunderous splash broke the silence about 40 feet from them. It sounded like a whale being dropped into the water, and whatever it was, the wake of it had splashed over the side of the raft. Larry shouted, "What the hell was that?" The boys sat in fear as they saw, quote, through the fog, could make out what looked like a telephone pole, and it was about 10 feet high with a bulb on top, end quote. It studied them for a minute and sunk under the water. Then it surfaced again and bellowed out a pissed-off sound that Brian described as a, quote, high-pitched whine. The boys were sitting ducks on the raft with no chance of survival. They all seemed to agree they stood a better chance in the water. They slipped on their fins and masks, and away they went. Next to Brian was Eric, but the rest were behind them. They swam a good distance before the thing surfaced again and began a long series of hissings and whines. The boys frantically swam, but now it was obvious this thing was chasing them. The rain started again, but it drove the fog away. Now it was dusk and getting more and more difficult to see. Then a 30-second long agonizing scream pierced the air. It had someone. Warren began to scream in terror. "Hey, help me! It's got Brad! I've got to get out of here!" Then Warren began to scream as it was beginning to attack him. Warren finally went silent. However, these were not painless deaths, as they were long and agonizing. Larry, realizing he was next, as he lagged behind, began to burst forward and caught up with Eric and Brian. It was now dark, and flashes of lightning was all that allowed Brian to see Larry and Eric nearby. Shortly after Brian looked over to see that Larry had vanished, both Eric and Brian dove for him, but to no avail. Then Eric went under. Brian was able to retrieve him. When they surfaced, Eric was unable to swim, and he simply just yelled out the word, "cramps." They struggled together toward shore. Then a giant wave pounded them and broke them apart. Eric was gone. A flash of lightning illuminated Eric ahead of Brian. He was nearly to the ship, and he was swimming on his own. Then, quote, right next to Eric, that telephone pole-like figure broke water. I could see the long neck and two small eyes. The mouth opened, and it bent over and dove on top of Eric, dragging him under. I screamed and swam past the ship, end quote. Brian does not remember much after that, until he reached the shore and got a mouthful of sand. He began crawling across the sand when a group of boys found him, and they asked if he was one of the lost divers that everyone was looking for. Brian said yes, and that he needed help immediately, and with that, he blacked out.
Brian awoke in the Pensacola Naval Base Hospital. The Coast Guard had found the raft and the old Ford still parked in the same spot. They had been searching all over for the boys. Brian was soon greeted by Director Emilio Edward McGovern of the Escambia County Search and Rescue. Brian told him exactly what happened and asked if any of the others had been found. McGovern replied, no. He then asked McGovern if he believed his story about the sea creature. McGovern only replied that he did, and that the sea held a lot of secrets. 1 week later, 14-year-old Brad's body washed ashore. Brian, being the last to see him and how he was dressed during the attack, identified the body. Brian ended up suffering a nervous breakdown, but he did make a full recovery 3 months later. Edward Brian McCleary moved his wife and son to Jacksonville, Florida. Brian would later share his story with Fate magazine in 1965. He then told his story to his son, Sean McCleary, who was 16 years old at the time. Sean maintained that his father's story was true, and that the recent article published by Reddit was indeed a fraud. Edward Brian McCleary was laid to rest on February 24, 2016. His son Sean was unable to make an appearance on our network due to circumstances, but may make an appearance within the coming months. Sean believes what his father encountered was this: a plesiosaur, also known as a Elasmosaurus. They belonged to the Northosauridae, which consisted of many types including the Mayorsaurus. Before we leave you tonight, here's a short clip of Sean McCleary being interviewed by the channel Adventure Guide. Once you hear his testimony, maybe, just maybe, you too will believe.
I grew up with my mother and father in Jacksonville, Florida, and that's where I'm pretty much from. That's where I was raised at, in Jacksonville, Florida. And my mom and dad and I, he wasn't like traumatized like that so much because we spent a lot of time in the water in Jacksonville and a lot of time at the beach. There's been other followings and other people that do research in cryptozoology that have done some shows, and also Fox News did a piece on my dad's story in Pensacola, and I did an interview with Fox News on one of their shows on my dad's story also. You know, when I was about 15 or 16 years old, my dad sat me down and he wanted to explain to me, you know, I guess he wanted to kind of process some of the information. I know my dad experienced a great deal of trauma from what happened. My dad described it as like a grayish green. First, it came out of the water. He's told me that it looked like a little bit like a brontosaurus, but the facial structure was different. He said he saw like a little part of the back as it was moving through the water. And then he saw like the head and the neck and everything when the head and the neck came up. That he thought it might be like a relative or ancestor of a Plesiosaurus, you know. I don't know. There's like the Loch Ness Monster and stuff. Maybe it's a creature similar to that, you know. After it happened in his teenage years, when he was in his early 20s, that's when he moved. He started going to LSU, Louisiana State University. So he moved out of Pensacola, you know, when he was in his early 20s. So I'm not sure if the other family members contacted him or not. And he did experience some suffering in life from that, you know, some guilt. about maybe he should have done something different, or they should have done something different. Yeah, so he went through a lot with that. I can tell you this, that my dad is, he is up in heaven, but here, he was a really kind, loving, caring, intelligent individual, and he was into science a lot. Quantum, he studied some quantum physics, and he was into like the universe and stuff a lot. He's a really kind and loving man, though. I'll tell you that. I'll leave you with those words.